Okay, so I'd like to welcome to the stage Lon Johnson, co-founder and CEO of WaterWorks, Andrew Gere, the president and COO of San Jose Water Company, and Nina Hawk, COO of Santa Clara Valley Water District. So we can just kind of go down the line here, and you can maybe just give a quick introduction for the audience.
Sure, Lon Johnson. I'm with WaterWorks. What we are is an equity crowdfunding platform that seeks to introduce water investors to water investment opportunities all across America. Very briefly, equity crowdfunding. Many of you have probably heard of crowdfunding. There are three types of crowdfunding. There's donation-based crowdfunding, where an individual makes a donation without any expectation of return, much like you see on GoFundMe or Indiegogo. There's reward-based crowdfunding, where somebody gives money and they receive a product or a service from a company. And the third, what we're focused on, is equity crowdfunding. Equity crowdfunding is where you make an investment, and for that you receive an equity stake in a company. Currently in America, there's about $2 billion in transactions being done through equity crowdfunding. And there are projections as high as $5 billion over the next 4 years in growth.
So I'm Andy Gere. I'm the President and Chief Operating Officer of San Jose Water Company. I've been with the company for 23 years, which at our company is not a long time. I'm kind of hitting middle of tenure. We're a retail water agency. We serve a population of about 1 million people here in Silicon Valley, San Jose metropolitan area, with service in 7 different distinct communities. We are the subsidiary company of SJW Group, which is traded on the New York Stock Exchange under the SJW ticker. We also have a utility in Texas, which we call SJWTX, much smaller, about 14,000 customers. The map you see sort of shows our service area relative to where we are today, and so it's a pretty large area as a single contiguous system goes. But when you talk with Nina, we're just one of many of her customers, and so we don't look so big after that. And our roles are a little intertwined, if you will, but I won't steal Nina's thunder. So we have about 224,000 customers. When we say customer, that's a connection, that's a meter at the street going to a home or a business. We deliver about 35 billion gallons of water per year. That's down from in the early 90s when it was closer to 50 billion gallons per year. So the water conservation measures that you've heard about for a long time, we've been doing that since around the 1970s, and you get this hard conservation where the population has grown tremendously over that time, but the actual overall water use has declined. Our sources of water are imported surface water, groundwater, and Nina's going to talk about those because we get those both through her agency. Local surface water, we have intakes and reservoirs up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and recycled water that we purchase and resell from the city of San Jose. We have a lot of equipment that uses electricity. That's kind of what I'm talking about there. We're an old company. We've been around for coming up on 153 years, so we've been in the business for quite a while. And the one thing that I tell everybody when they say, what kind of business are you in? I say, we're in the public health business. And I say that because the service we deliver to our consumers, they ingest daily, they feed their children with it, they wash and bathe in it, and they cook with it without ever giving it another thought. So we are in the public health business.
All right. Good afternoon. So how you? Oh.
The big green one.
Very good. All right, so I'm Nina Hawk. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Valley Water, otherwise known as Santa Clara Valley Water District. We serve a population of almost 2 million people, so the entire county of Santa Clara, which includes, of course, Silicon Valley. Our biggest customer sits to my left here. It's Andy Gere, and he just went over what pretty much makes up a retail customer service area for this region. We have about 15 cities we service and provide to. We have approximately 13 water retailers, 10 reservoirs, dams that we operate along with several different streams. We're in the business of water resource management. So we actually look at the full life cycle of the water we bring in, and we provide that to the retailers who then make sure it's also safe and able to go to the customer to use it day in, day out for the tap. So a couple important things to note about our system. It's very unique. We have in it about 55% of our water we bring in from outside of the area. So what that means is we have to move a lot of water, which means we have to use a lot of energy to do that. As we bring it into the county, we then have to pump it through the county in an intricate set of pipes. Treatment plants serving about 200 to 220 MGD a day is pretty common, which is 1 million gallons per day. And then we also are the groundwater agency. So we're responsible through state law to make sure that we create a healthy groundwater basin. And that includes for drinking water purposes, but also to make sure that we don't have subsidence, so that we make sure the infrastructure, all the freeways, the highways, the large buildings, the companies that thrive every day within the Silicon Valley have what they need in order to sustain and not have any issues over the years. So beyond that, why is the groundwater supply so important? We use it conjunctively, and what that means is we move water in and out of it. We also use those reservoirs to help augment that. And then in addition, we have to maintain this infrastructure day in, day out. So that's a real interesting challenge. We've been around for 90 years, not as long as Andy, but 90 years long, and that's a long time for a government agency. We typically are around for quite some time, but it means we have to innovate. And so in order to really grow with our surrounding, our urban community, you can't do business the same way every day, all the time. And so throughout the years, we've had to change how we look at water supply, specifically moving from just groundwater basin management to bringing water in from outside of the county, and then also looking at new ways that we can create new water supplies. So those are kind of the key elements, and hopefully setting the stage for the discussion we'll have for the rest of the afternoon.
Thank you. So we've heard all throughout the day how water and energy are inextricably linked together. So what does that mean for infrastructure investment? What are some of the ways that water and energy are embedded in delivery, and what does that look like as far as capital investment and operations? And Andy, I'll start with you.
Sure, yeah, so when we think about water, Nina touched on it, you have to move it from where it starts, right, where it hits the ground in a stream or a lake or reservoir, to where your customer is using. That generally means pumping. For us, on the retail side, we may pump it out of a groundwater well. We may get it at pressure from a system on Nina's side where it's already been lifted, treated, and ready to deliver, but at pressure. So there's energy embedded in that water right there. When you think about pressure at your tap, that's just elevation. So we run what we call a gravity system. So to have pressure at your tap at your house, there's a tank higher than your house that water's been pumped up to, right? It's storing that energy, and then when you open your tap, that energy is released to deliver that water to you by gravity. So that's like in the most basic sense how water's embedded. We've heard today a lot of other ways, hot water, heat carried through water and things like that, but that's at its core, it's moving it from where it is to where it's used.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and add to that. So one of the interesting challenges we face is as we move the water, we're actually moving it all the way from the Sierra snowpack into the Bay Area. So you can imagine that several miles of pumping and movement of water. One of the biggest themes, which I think is not always identified or well understood, is that water agencies do actually look at the water very differently than I think the common person does. In that we want to understand how the effects of climate change are going to affect how we deliver water. And that gets into everything from sea level rise to varying shifts in the seasons, wetter winters, drier, more prolonged drought scenarios, which are becoming more prevalent, especially in California. But since 55% of our water comes from estuaries and areas where we have that potential of saltwater intrusion, and we also have that sea level rise to combat as well, we have to really look at what can we do in our operations and our water supply planning to account for those different types of changes associated with climate change. So our agency, about 20 years ago, our scientists and engineers started to identify those trends and decided it was time for us to come up with a policy whereby we would try to achieve, one, we would integrate climate change impacts into our water supply planning reliability and our investments, but also two, to reach carbon neutrality by 2020. And so it's been a pretty aggressive track for us as an agency, and we've done a lot of creative things to get there, but I would say I don't think a lot of people understand that behind the scenes from a water resource management perspective, energy is embedded in how we look at providing supply to our customers long-term over the years. So I'll just compliment that.
And Lon, why is it so important to bring in new models of funding for infrastructure projects?
Well, first off, We're the financial need. When you look at nationwide, I've seen estimates that we're looking at about $1 trillion need nationwide over the next 25 years in infrastructure spending. I don't think even if we had a Congress full of Democrats that we have $1 trillion. So that will necessitate a capital stack that's going to be very different from what we're accustomed to. And so it's all hands on deck at that point. It's going to be a mix between federal and state and institutional investing. And one way that can also is a growing pool of capital to be looked at and considered is equity crowdfunding. So over here you've got $1 trillion in financial need over the next 20, 25 years. And over here you've got an equity crowdfunding ability of roughly about $2 billion currently in annual transactions, growing to $5 billion. But what really the political value add to equity crowdfunding is you're engaging your community to be a part of the solution. That this is not a donation, that they're able to help fund a P3 or help fund an orphan feasibility study or to help fund that local water technology company that may have a terrific solution that wants to scale. And so it's bringing new capital to the table here in a way that will be also politically and community benefit, tie the community greater to their water system.
Anything to add?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. As an investor-owned utility in California, our capital structure is prescribed by our regulators. It's debt and equity. We're publicly traded. So raising money to do projects is not an issue for us. But when we talk about innovation, a lot of the companies that are developing those technologies, they're startups. It's Silicon Valley type companies that are, we had one that came to us and said, we have this technology. Is there a way that you can employ it to solve a problem, right? Those are the kinds of companies that are, at that scale where they're not big enough to get funded through traditional means. They're not publicly traded yet. And so the crowdsourced funding seems like a really innovative way to spur those into mature enough companies that can, provide innovative technologies, products, services for our industry.
So do energy efficiency benefits impact new models of funding? I guess, Nina, I'll start with you.
Yeah, definitely. So going back to kind of the carbon neutrality target we have, and what's equally important as we look at moving water around and energy impacts is looking at water conservation and water recycling. So those two combined can create a really significant long-term planning impact that would basically lower the amount of water needed, so then you wouldn't have to move or provide as much to the community. So for example, we have programs that have gone over a couple decades now. We're seeing huge return in terms of offsets on carbon footprint based on the fact that that water is now not having to be treated, not having to be moved, not having to be heated, not having to be treated on the back end after its use and then introduced into the bay. So when you look at the full life cycle, it's very important to consider, programs that we can do. While they may seem like just feel-good things or socially important and responsible things to do, they're also creating these other benefits. So when you see a water agency out there working on a water conservation program, no, it's not just about saving water. It's also creating an entire footprint, environmentally sound footprint impact as well. And so it's very important.
What about for your organization?
The same. We use an asset management model to sort of rank infrastructure improvements or new things that we're going to invest in the system. And embedded in that is how efficient are these things. So if we want to replace a pump and motor, if we can spend a little bit more for a high efficiency motor, for example, the payback is relatively quick on those kinds of investments. And that goes right back to customers. So it reduces the amount of power that we use. We don't keep that, they get that. And so there's benefits to customers that are kind of embedded in our rate-making model. We want to try and be efficient because if we can lower the water bill, that allows us to meet the long-term infrastructure needs over time. Nina's example of sort of keeping local water supply local, we look at that. We just made a very large investment in our largest treatment plant because as drinking water regulations got tougher, this old plant that was built in 1969 couldn't treat to the standards, and we basically had to let a lot of water go by. We couldn't collect it, treat it. It's high in our system, so all that embedded energy in the water, well, that would flow out from gravity. So we made an investment in this plant, and by capturing and processing more water, we avoid all of the costs and the greenhouse gases and so forth, of bringing it in from a long way away. And so those are the kinds of things that go in our decision making. Do we do this? Do we not? That was very much I don't know, kind of a flag that we waved when we went to our regulator and said, look, there's a lot of reasons for doing this. Here's a really important one.
And Lon, you had mentioned P3s earlier, public-private partnerships, and we've heard a lot about them today. Could you each talk a little bit about how important they are for your organization, your communities?
Well, again, we're looking at a capital stack going forward, especially for some of your more underserved communities, that's going to look very different. And P3s offer a way, increasingly, to finance water improvements or water efficiencies. Eric this morning had said something really important and profound, I think, and that is the risk fund. That we need to go out there and create and risk here and allow engineers and allow scientists to throw the ball a little longer. Now, oftentimes, your board or whoever you're answering to are a bit more risk averse. So let's go to a community that may not be, a social impact investor community or an investor, again, using equity crowdfunding with a P3. And again, I'm not saying that equity crowdfunding is going to fund $40 million operations, but equity crowdfunding could go out there and fill that $500 to $1 million hole and, again, pay for or allow the financing of a feasibility study or a project that's demonstrating a new technology.
Andy?
So we're a little more entrepreneurial than your average water company or water utility because we're a private company. That allows us to look at P3 opportunities a little bit differently, both in terms of using them or being on the other side of them. And we've done a few where we've been just a service provider to smaller city systems that we've made some investment in our ability to repair leaks and respond, and we're big enough to have 24-hour staff and that kind of thing. They hire us to handle that, and then they can take that piece of their rate bill that they would ordinarily have to spend on that and invest in their infrastructure and resiliency of their system, or get out of. We have another one with a small municipality where we run the system for them, and they didn't want to sell it, but they didn't really want to be in the water business anymore because all their people retired and the regulations were getting tougher. So those are ways we can kind of help communities that they have the responsibility for delivering water to customers. They're a municipality and they're in a sort of a construct where they can't just sort of sell their system, but they can partner with a private company who's also in that business but has some scale that can help them out, and then they can take the resources that they might otherwise invest in that and use it for other things that the community needs.
Yeah, this is so interesting because I think our two agencies are in the Silicon Valley, so we actually get, I think, a lot more influence and push than most traditional water agencies. We too have actually explored a number of public-private partnerships. Ones that we're already underway and doing in the energy business include PPAs, so purchase power agreements, where we actually go in and do solar at our various sites. So we have solar both at our headquarters and our various treatment plants, and we're going to continue to do those. They're 20-year deals where you're able to go ahead and have someone come in, similar to how you would a residential home, and have someone put the solar up and they reap kind of that revenue benefit while you get to get the green power. So it's a great match. That's a classic example. Another example for us, in order to achieve that carbon neutrality that I was mentioning earlier by 2020, we are already achieving it. And the reason we're achieving it is we're working very closely with a lot of solar facilities down in the Central Valley. It's in a desert area where they do private investment that then marries up with private entities or authorities that then pool together public agencies like us, and we buy in. We say, okay, yeah, we want to buy this power. It's great, it's green, it's cheaper, and they go in, they negotiate with the private entity, and they're able to then go ahead and create solar farms that then we're able to buy that power at a reduced cost, which is also environmentally friendly. So you're really starting to see more of that triple bottom line thought process in our agency, but there's also some other water agencies starting to catch on with them as well. But I think our region really pushes the envelope more than others. But I think getting more to a public-private partnership when it comes to operations of large facilities, we are now starting to explore in a couple other water agencies across the U.S. the idea of bringing in a private company who would help design, construct, and build treatment facilities to create new water. And so we're starting to do those types of procurements now. They're a little bit more prevalent in the energy industry, but we're starting to go into that space as well. And it's really interesting. It's a place where you can grab some really great innovation from around the world. We're seeing folks coming from other countries, coming in trying to explain to us new technologies. So it's actually very exciting. It also requires a lot of time and energy to better understand that space. So it's just a new place to play, but we're very excited.
And so on that note, where are you seeing some of the more successful investments? Is it on the hardware side, software, services?
Do you want to start, Lon?
I'll jump in. You know, I'm going to say kind of all of the above. You know, we've looked at, you know, sort of when we say hardware in the water industry, we're talking about hard stuff like pipes and pumps and tanks. And so one of the things we've really done a lot of work on was use software tools, really good modeling tools, with better sensors, pressure sensors throughout our system, so we calibrate that model. And you can, as you renew your pipe network, make it more efficient, so that, you know, your pipes are right sized, your tanks are not too big or too small, your pumps are at the exact size they need to be. And so if your network, sort of the backbone, is efficient, you sort of use a variety of tools to get there. And so the thing operates more efficiently than it would any other day. And then you can kind of go a step deeper and say, well, what about lost water? You know, all systems leak to some degree, and, you know, we're pretty proud of the number we have in terms of our water loss, but we said, well, just what if we could cut that down by 25 or 30 or 50% and go looking for leaks that don't surface? And so there's technology tools coupled with software tools. You put these listening devices throughout your system, and they know what a quiet system sounds like, and if leaks make a little bit of noise, it hears one and it listens to it for a while and says, okay, start looking in this area. And then we have some other technology tools, that ground microphones and things, and correlators. You go find these leaks. They may have been leaking for 1, 2, 5, 10 years, but they're very small. But over that time, water's leaving the system, and there's energy embedded in that, and there's cost to customers. So we're using a whole variety of things to kind of get at that. Anytime we think about water leaving the system that's not going to a beneficial use, well, that's energy that's also leaving the system that's not going to a beneficial use. So we really look at investments in terms of what's the problem we're trying to solve, and then what are the tools available to us to get at that. And it's all of those things. It's services, it's hardware, it's software, it's kind of brick and mortar kind of infrastructure.
Have you seen any innovative solutions or any successful investment solutions in, you know, the private sector that you've been working with?
Well, I mean, I'll leave it. We were just talking about one behind backstage. If you want to talk about that one as a prime example, the sensor. Yeah,
so we had a startup company here in the Valley come to us and say, we've got this ability to sort of take sensors and have them coupled with very small cell phone technology and really good data management. Do you have any problems we can solve with that? We're trying to grow our business. And we said, boy, wouldn't it be great if we could do pump efficiency testing in real time? So, you know, typically it would take an operator and an electrician. They would go out to a pump and they do a 3-point efficiency test and find out if that pump is on its efficiency curve or if it's starting to wear and needs some service. Well, we're able to do that in real time now. And so we have that information going into our SCADA system, which is a fancy name for what controls what pumps come on to meet what demands. And it says, where's my next most efficient pump that can put water into this zone? And it has that data not just based on a test we did last year, it's on a test that was done today. And so that's an example of, we didn't know there was a company out there that could solve the problem. We knew we would like to have better information on that, and we kind of got married up through somebody kind of approaching us and saying, what might our thing do to solve your problem? And I learned, by the way, that is called the Internet of Things, which, if you've wondered, does it exist? It's real. I didn't know. It sounded really good on, you know, chat rooms and things, but that's real. That's the Internet of Things, where you take a physical thing out in the world and you connect it to the Internet and you get some use out of it.
But that's a prime example. There are companies like that now they've got a successful project. Now they've got to go sell it to 49,999 more. That's capital intensive. Right. Now, oftentimes, these companies have, you know, they've run through their founder money, they've run through their seed money, but they're not yet ready for Series A. And they need somewhere between $100,000 and $1 million to slowly start to scale. That's where we think the power of equity crowdfunding could start to help those companies grow.
And Nina, you mentioned the triple bottom line. So how can we ensure, you know, that that social return? How can we ensure that the low-income populations are not left behind?
Yeah, so that's a really tough one. In the state of California specifically, we have what's called Prop 218 or Prop 26, which gets into all these fun legalities about what we can use our money for as public agencies. And so to do triple bottom line effectively, I think you have to take that step back, as I noted earlier, and talk about what does water resource management look like. So put it in the context of looking into the future, what does the community need in terms of water supply? And then kind of step it backwards. And so what we've done and identified is as we go into decision-making mode about either water supply or capital investments, we're going to look and we're going to rank those for project validation purposes, and we actually include criterion related to social impact, environmental benefits, climate change. So you really almost have to culturally shift the way you think traditionally from just a rehab of existing infrastructure to what makes beneficial sense all around. Now, of course, that can't be the most heavily weighted criterion, but it's really a great way to start integrating it into organizations like ours that have been around for almost 100 or over 100 years to really shift that mindset into a different way of thinking and put some real good reason behind it, put some science behind it, put some technology behind it. And then, it becomes exciting and you really get a real kind of forceful kind of growing amongst your employees to want to actually explore those spaces. So, I mean, that's how we've essentially started doing it in our agency the past few decades. So.
I would say also just to broadcast that need. Again, what we have, oftentimes institutional investors in the infrastructure space want to look at larger deals. And your underserved communities are small. Their financial needs may be small. And again, using a P3 or an equity crowdfunding method allows you to not only to broadcast your need and engage a local community, but also to use that and broadcast it nationwide. We're seeing, you've seen it over just in the evolution of political contributions. Right? We're looking at $1 billion a year now in political contributions. You're looking at $2 billion in equity crowdfunding. If a story is told properly to a community of social impact investors from wherever, from Kentucky or West Virginia or the Central Valley and nationwide, a community of social impact water investors can be built.
Well, we're just about out of time. Thank you all for joining us today, and hopefully you'll stick around for the nice weather and drinks that Chris talked about, and we can continue the conversation later today.
All right.
Thank you very much.